Elias Petterson says, I want to see it first before I lock in long term. Plus, who are the best players under the age of 23 in the Western Conference? And the top 10 teams that need to win right now. All that and more coming up on today's Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, indeed. Welcome into a Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode and making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. We are also your team every day. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we discuss the news that Elias Petterson wants to see the direction Vancouver's headed before he makes a move to potentially sign long-term. We'll take a look at the Athletics list of players ages 23 and younger and where they slot in various tiers. And we'll also take a look at the teams facing the most pressure to win right now. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and joined by my Tuesday co-host, Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators. The final episode that we'll do here in the month of August, which means September, which means like 5 weeks until the start of the NHL season. And I, for one, could not be more excited. It just keeps getting closer and closer.
It's starting to feel like the age where last season feels like a whole year ago. Like it just feels like a lifetime ago since we saw Vegas play. Like it just seems like the summer months in terms of hockey just drag on. Like these go so much slower than like weeks in season do.
Yeah, and it's nice that, we're going to start to hear the training camp rumblings here in a couple of weeks. And then at that point, we're in the clear and we're ready to roll for the start of next season. Now, one player who maybe is not, this was an eye-opener for me because he is a guy that I think the Vancouver Canucks are really hoping will be a part of their future for a long time. Mr. Elias Petterson, who, Nick, as you had pointed out to me, told the Canucks that talks on his contract extension are off as of now. Kind of just wants to see what the team is doing, kind of the direction that they're going. And let's just start on the Petterson side. I think this makes all the sense in the world for him because Vancouver is trying to kind of come back up. And so why would you lock in before you see the direction in which the franchise is going and you get that inkling as to if they're going to be able to accomplish what they're trying to do?
Yeah, he certainly has the leverage to be able to do that because he knows he's the best player on the Vancouver Canucks. And yeah, I mean, it makes sense for him because you look around the NHL and it's all about the mega deals, 8-year deals, lock in. That's the entire prime of Elias Pettersson's career. And he's not going to want to sign. And then, let's say the Canucks suck again for 2 years. And then all of a sudden you're faced with a rebuild. And you're Elias Pettersson, you don't really have a lot of leverage to where you go. Like, maybe you have a no movement clause, or maybe the team wants you as their kind of building piece. So it makes sense for him to be like, let's see how this year goes first before I devote the rest of the prime of my career, or at least the bulk of it, to this one team if I'm not sure what it's going to look like 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah, and he is without a doubt one of the better up-and-coming players in not only the Western Conference, but you can put him on that list in the NHL as well. And so there's going to be no shortage of people that would be happy to get in line and to give him that type of a long-term deal if he wants to go elsewhere. And this was a Canucks franchise that it was a mess at the start of the season. They did my boy Bruce Boudreau dirty by just basically letting him walk the plank with the season in shambles. You bring in Rick Tocchet, and he tried to kind of reestablish that base, as many coaches do when they're thrown into a situation like this. And they played better at the end of the season than they did certainly at the beginning of the season. But there still is a lot of work to do to try to kind of weed out the guys that are in, the guys that are out. And so it's no guarantee that Vancouver is going to find success here this year, which, as you alluded to, could lead to some more potential moves that lead to them taking a bit of a step back.
And if you're Vancouver, boy, you better be doing everything you can to try to get this deal done sooner rather than later. Because we talked about Elias Petterson kind of wants to see the direction of the Vancouver Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks direction kind of depends on if Elias Petterson is going to be there or not. Because if for some reason he wants out, all of a sudden you have to change your entire team because you don't really have that building block up front to build around anymore. I mean, no disrespect to somebody like Andrei Kuzmenko, but Elias Pettersson is one of the elite players in the NHL. That is a tier that's very hard to find players at. So if you're Vancouver, like, let's say he pulls a Matthew Tkachuk, a year from now and just says, I don't want to be here. I'm not going to sign long-term. I would like to be traded somewhere. Then all of a sudden you're the Canucks and you have all this money locked in to veteran contracts to try to boost them. You're all of a sudden having to change your entire strategy. So if you're Vancouver, your best bet is to somehow within the next 11 months, find a way to lock in Elias Pettersson long-term. Move whatever money you can to make it happen. Because if the Canucks don't get Pettersson long-term, if he plays a power card, if he doesn't want to sign long-term, if he wants to be traded, this franchise is going to be in for, kind of a rough few years.
I wonder how JT Miller factors into this as well, because, he was a guy who pretty polarizing player when things are going bad for the Canucks this past season, and a guy who is pretty intense out there on the ice. And so you wonder if he would be a player that will gel with a guy like Pettersson. Then again, they have played together. It's not like they were just playing together for the first time this past season. They have played together before, but you wonder if they need to free up a little money, if they would try to revive some of those trade talks again for a guy like JT Miller, or if they view him as somebody that would be a complementary piece to put into that lineup underneath Pettersson, who is clearly the franchise player.
Yeah, I mean, you have Quinn Hughes back there. So at least got somebody a blue line, and if Thatcher Demko's healthy, you got a pretty good goaltender in there too. But yeah, like JT Miller's best years of his career have come playing next to Elias Pettersson. And he locked in to a very, very long contract, a very big money contract with the Canucks not too long ago. So he's probably not going to be too thrilled if all of a sudden he's locked in to a team in which his best playmaker has just left. And also the Vancouver Canucks probably aren't going to be happy because they're locked in to a big money deal to a player who's probably not going to be worth it if his number one playmaker is gone.
Right. Yeah. There are a lot of intricate pieces to this. And so this is something that definitely is going to have the Western Conference's eye, and it'll have ours as well. Now, there's no shortage of talent in the Western Conference. There's no shortage of young talent in the Western Conference, but some names that were just drafted have made their way onto a tiers list by The Athletic, ranking players age 23 and under. And so we're going to look at the names that made the list from the Western Conference to determine if we think they're in the right spot. We'll play the Goldilocks and the Three Bears edition of this. Too high, too low, or just right. That is coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Yes, you heard me right. All customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel, the app that's easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. Again, thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal joined by Nick Morgan. And Nick, we're going to dive in to a list that was put together by The Athletic, and they went through and ranked players ages 23 and under in both the East and the West. They put them into tiers such as franchise player, and up and down the list. And I took the liberty of looking at the Western Conference players. So we're going to just go through and see if these guys are in the right spot, or if they're too high, or if they're too low. So we'll start with the first tier, which was bubble generational player and elite NHL player. There was one player in this tier. One.
Guess we
Connor
Connor
Bedard. We can pretty much say
you probably guess who that was. Yeah.
So that was tier 1. There was nobody in tier 2, which was elite NHL players. There were a few players in the Eastern Conference that made that category, but that's the Eastern Conference. Tier 3 was bubble elite NHL players and NHL All-Stars. This tier included Matty Beniers and Trevor Zegras. Then tier 4 was NHL All-Stars, which included Leo Carlsson, Matt Boldy, Mason McTavish, Will Smith, and Bo Byram. And then the 5th tier was bubble NHL All-Star and top of the lineup players. This included Wyatt Johnston and Logan Cooley. So it's a lot to take in for this list, because there are a lot of names in this list that have not played an NHL game yet. Now, I can see it from Connor Bedard's perspective, because he has been billed as a generational talent for a long time. But I don't know about putting players on lists like this before they've even set foot on NHL ice. Am I out of my mind here?
Well, it's weird, because if you're going by just potential, like, and you're willing to call your shot on Connor Bedard, and it's like, yep, generational player, then why are you being so, I guess, conservative with where you're putting somebody like Leo Carlsson, who's all the way down in tier 4? I mean, if he is easily, I would say at least tier 3, maybe a strong argument for tier 2 as elite NHL player, but at the very least, bubble elite NHL player, because that's a guy that can score, 100 points a season right there. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I feel like we're kind of locking in Bedard as a sure thing. And yeah, I think I'm buying the Bedard hype. I think he's going to be the most exciting, player to come out of the draft in a very long time. But it's weird that everybody's kind of penciling him in as a sure thing, where maybe some other guys that, would have been top of their draft classes, in any other year besides the Bedard year, are kind of being, it's like, okay, well, we need to wait and see. Not so high in them yet. So it's just kind of, yeah, I mean, it's, I wouldn't say it's weird, but I would say it's at least like a little inconsistent.
And this was, I should add some more context. Corey Pronman put this list together, and here's tier 2. It's elite NHL players, and these guys are all from the East. It's Jack Hughes, Tim Stützle, Adam Fantilli, and Matvei Michkov. those are your 4 players in tier 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I guess I just go through the rest of the list and look, for instance, tier 3, some names in the East. Dylan Cousins is a bubble elite NHL player and NHL All-Star. And then Luke Hughes is also in that grouping. And I think in terms of that third tier with Zegras and Beniers being the 2 Western Conference names on that list, and this is something that you and I, in fact, even have, I think, discussed in previous weeks, is that if you can get a guy like Zegras, a guy like Beniers to put together a huge season, you can definitely elevate them on this list. And having one of those seasons that you just kind of know, you're like, that's the one we've been waiting for. And now we can definitely ascend them into the elite tier beyond just being kind of one of those fringe guys, fringe elite.
Yeah. It's I feel like there's more talking points with some of those guys you mentioned in the East. Because are you really telling me that Dylan Cousins has higher upside than Leo Carlsson? That's the argument Corey Bronman
That's what I'm
wants to
being
make
led
right
to believe.
there? Yeah, I mean, there seems like there's more talking points on that side, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, other than that, like Carlson's the one person that I feel like is out of place on this list. The other tiers like the bubble, elite, Beniers and Zegras, I'm right there with you. I think like they're both kind of trending that way. Zegras, I think, certainly is going to have some help from the aforementioned Carlsson and also just the Ducks maybe taking a step forward. Beniers, we see what he's been able to do as a 19 and 20-year-old in this league. He's only going to keep getting better. So I think that tier is right. The only other thing I might change on this list is Logan Cooley was in tier 5, which is bubble NHL All-Star and top of the lineup player. I really do think people are sleeping on Logan Cooley.
I agree.
I'm not much of like a draft prospect guy. Don't watch a lot of juniors or stuff like that, but I do watch a lot of college hockey. And watching Cooley last year in Minnesota, like he stood out to me. Like he was up there with Adam Fantilli in terms of just, a guy who looked like he is an NHL player playing against a bunch of college kids.
Right.
That's like the one thing that maybe I would change is I would bump him higher. And maybe somebody like Bo Byram, certainly a good top of the lineup player. I don't necessarily see like, all-star every year type of guy.
Yeah. The big thing that I take exception to is that Matt Boldy should be higher on the list than
I had a feeling you would have qualms with that.
I'm kidding. I like putting Boldy at that point right now because not everybody's an all-star, and he is going into his third league season in the league. All these guys can drop down this list. It is just interesting to look at some players from the same draft who had similar profiles who get put 3 tiers lower than the guys at the. It is just interesting to kind of see the thought processes at work with some of these, but at the end of the day, rankings are subjective.
It is off-season content, my friend.
Correct. Well, speaking of off-season content, we're going to try to light a little fire under a few teams in the West. The 10 teams that are facing the most pressure to win right now. That comes your way after this here on today's episode of Locked On NHL. Final segment of this week's Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. Again, thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal joined by Nick Morgan. And all right, Nick, another rankings. Top 10 teams that are facing the most pressure. Teams that got to win right now. Let me have it.
Yeah, number 1 is obvious. I think you and I have talked about this before, but Edmonton Oilers, I don't think there's any debate. Maybe the most pressure in the entire NHL right now, even more so than the Toronto Maple Leafs. Look, you have two of the best generational players of the last 10 years. Like, it's not hyperbole to say that McDavid and Draisaitl are the best duo since Lemieux Yager. Like, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that. And the Edmonton Oilers have one conference final appearance since 2006 to show for it, since that, Cup finals run. They haven't even won a game in the conference finals with McDavid or Draisaitl. So this is a team, like, it's the last year of Ken Holland's contract. We know Jay Woodcroft is kind of on the hot seat at this point. If they don't get it done this year, if they don't, I'm not saying they need to win the cup, but if they don't, make some sort of semblance of a run, look like a team that could win it all with maybe one or two adjustments, boy, you gotta change. You gotta change something. Not saying they're gonna trade Connor McDavid and start it all over again, but there is going to be some sort of massive overhaul. I mean, do you have any qualms about the Oilers being number one on this list?
No, not even remotely, because the fate of that franchise hangs in the balance, because at some point those two are going to say enough is enough. And like, you hit it right on the head, is they need to have a season in which they make tangible progress, or you've got to, at bare minimum, bring in somebody else to be GM to try to figure out a different way to attack it.
Yeah, you got to make the conference finals this year. And you got to take whoever you're playing to the brink. Like, you can't just have a quick exit there again.
That's a great, I think that is right on the money for expectations for what they need to do this year.
Yeah. Rest of the list, number 2, I had the Canucks for reasons we talked about in the first block. I mean, that's a team that I think needs to win right now, to save their generational players. 3, I had the LA Kings, just because of, the amount of investment they put in this team. Haven't gotten past the first round in a while. 4, I had the Dallas Stars. Again, a team that, made a lot of changes. A lot of people are talking about them, not just favorites for the conference, but cup favorites maybe this year, sort of in that top tier. They have to, I think, make another very deep, strong run in order to, I think, satisfy expectations. 5, not necessarily that they absolutely need to win the cup this year, but 5, I have Colorado, just in the sense of, you had this super team a couple of years ago, maybe the best cup winning playoff run by a single team in the past 20 years or so. And then kind of a bad exit last year to Seattle. A lot of changes this year. I think Colorado needs to have, another deep run, look good in the series that they get knocked out on, maybe take whoever beats them to the brink or something like that. And then the rest is just kind of, fringe teams that I think, people are expecting them to win. I have Minnesota 6. I have Winnipeg 7, just because I think they're also trying to convince Connor Hellebuck and Mark Scheifele to stick around for a little bit. Speaking of, 8, Calgary Flames. I think they need to rebound with a lot of the changes they made. 9, just here because they're one of the teams I think expected to win, is the Vegas Golden Knights. But hey, a cup, the reason, they're probably one of the 3 cup favorites, but the fact that they won last year is the reason that they're not under a lot of pressure. Yep. And then for 10, I picked the St. Louis Blues, just because I think a lot of people thought last year's kind of catastrophe of a season, maybe not necessarily representative of the team that they have. And they have some young talent there. They made a big investment to get Kevin Hayes. So I do think out of some of those remaining teams, the St. Louis Blues are one that you would have to look out and go, hey, this is a team that is, needs to win right now.
I like the list. I'm going to single out the teams that I think are in, we need to win, or there are going to be some big changes from a roster standpoint. Obviously, the Minnesota Wild is they're dealing with those cap hits, but at the same time, if you keep rolling out the same roster you have and the results don't match up, then you got to go at it a different way. So there's pressure on them to win this year. Otherwise, some of those veteran names are going to get traded. Same thing for Calgary. It's a Calgary team that did make some moves in the offseason, but by and large, it's the same roster as last year. And so there's going to be pressure on them to prove that the things that went wrong was Daryl Sutter. And so if they don't win, then it's like, well, maybe it wasn't the coach as much, even though we know it definitely was.
Yeah.
I love the Kings on that list because this is something that I think doesn't get talked about a ton, is that the Kings have become a team that uses, for the most part, there are exceptions, of course, they use a lot of their prospects and draft picks to acquire ready talent. And so if you do that, you deplete your system. You don't have reserves necessarily to fill in for guys if you need them. So there's a lot of pressure on that group to continue to win and to further that without also really impactfully addressing the goalie situation.
Yeah.
So that's a great spot for them. And so, yeah, I don't have any objections really to any of this. I would maybe bump, just because they did win the Cup 2 years ago, I'd maybe bump Colorado down a little bit.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, too, they've had a ton of things go on, both on the ice and off the ice over the last 6 months. All the things that happened with Landeskog, that they're still kind of trying to figure out a timetable for him to return. So that obviously is putting them in a situation where they're not going to be as dominant as they have been. And the Dallas Stars are trying to avoid the Pete DeBoer curse, where the first year with the team, he takes them well into the postseason and things just kind of start to back up from there. So a great list. And I think the burner on the stove is on to varying degrees for all of those teams. But if it's the Edmonton Oilers, if you come close to that burner, you're going to get burned. So Western Conference Finals and to the brink, your opponent goes to the brink. I think that's a fantastic need. It's a need. It's not a, boy, that would be great if that happened, wouldn't it? It's a need for the Edmonton Oilers this year.
I think anything short of that is a clean house, both behind the bench and the front office. And I think you're going to see some other of these supporting actors in Edmonton. I think you're going to see maybe some new faces. Maybe you see the Oilers be more aggressive to getting maybe a legitimate third superstar.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're going to have to try to throw out the playbook a little bit if it doesn't work out this year, because you can't waste Draisaitl and McDavid. I mean, they still have years of their prime, but you got to start building towards what you're going to build towards now. They
have years of their prime, but they don't have their prime a second time. Right. So you got to maximize it. And that will do it for today's episode of Locked On NHL. So thank you for tuning in, and make sure before you go that you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any Locked On NHL content throughout the course of the week. Make sure to follow Nick at Locked On Predators and myself at Locked On Wild for more info on your favorite teams. You can find new episodes all week long as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.